Yes, sir. Welcome to Theology in the Dirt. Theology in the Dirt, we try to practice our theology in public square of our homes, our city, and our world. You can check out all of our notes from sermons, podcast links, other resources from theologyindirt.com. My name's Mitchell Jolly.
And I'm Chris Hayes.
Who are you?
Jon Palmer.
Whoa, check it out. We have not just a guest, but we have a permanent Theology in the Dirt outsider, insider, contributor, good conversationalist, elder, Three Rivers Church.
Extraordinaire.
Kennesaw State graduate.
Hey, oh man, don't even go. I'm not an owl. I will never be an owl.
You're a Southern Poly
I'm
guy.
a hornet.
Is that what they are?
Yeah, they were hornets.
They were hornets?
Southern Poly were hornets, yeah, man.
So engineer, project manager.
Doesn't sound like an upgrade.
Yeah. It was kind of, it's in the same area as the bee, you know, the
they have
jacket.
wings.
Yeah.
It's like with shorter people are like, no, I didn't go to shorter college. I went to shorter university.
Well, I started at Southern. It was Southern Tech.
It was Southern Tech. Was it really?
Yeah.
That's wild, man.
That was a hot minute ago.
I didn't know that. But I know all you Southern Poly guys are not happy about that being Kennesaw State now. But well, welcome in. Glad you're here, man.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's good? Anything good happened this weekend?
I got a couple of things. Well, this is 2 weekends ago, but so Addison's favorite Braves player is Ozzie Albies.
Sweet.
Loves Ozzie Albies. So he was doing an autograph signing and appearance down in the Battery. So I got to take her to that a couple of days ago. She was so excited. She got to meet him and take a picture with him. We got a couple of things signed. So that was just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then going to the Georgia Tech game on Friday night. So, which is going to be exciting. So Black Friday in Athens.
Nice.
We're like 50-yard line row, like 4 or 5, and we're like right there on the field, a buddy of mine. And
Man.
like, you remember
Georgia?
the seat?
Yeah, I do.
I hate to see that when Georgia Tech actually beats them. Sorry.
That day may come in the next 10 or 12 years. We'll see.
It may be.
You never know. Rivalry games are so crazy. You can't ever predict them. Like, it'd be easy to say Georgia's going to win by 20, but it won't shock anybody if Tech wins or keeps it close either. So,
Did you see Georgia football equipment tweet? Look. His Georgia Tech mug.
Just
That's
turn
awesome.
my mug towards the camera.
Yeah, so everybody can
repent
see.
and believe.
There you go. It is rivalry week, right?
Yes.
Georgia football equipment put out a tweet last night where they had and sometimes they tweet out what the coaches are wearing for that week, and everything was black. Everything was black. And so all the people wanting Georgia to wear the black jerseys for a game are now out in force. Like, what does this mean? Does this mean? And Kirby, I love the fact that Kirby is so old school. He's like, we got to have that. I'm at the wrong place. I'm like, that's my guy. I like the cranky, like, we're going to beat people wearing red or white.
Just put them on. It does there's no difference in the black or red. It's just a jersey.
That's
Put
right.
them on for the fans.
That's right. Yeah. Well, for me, what's good, I had to get my head and heart around the reality that I did not want Georgia playing the Southeastern Conference Championship game because there's no advantage to it. Only, I feel like only can be hurt. But they are playing the South SEC Championship game.
Who's against?
It depends on this weekend.
Texas or Texas A&M.
Yeah,
okay.
Whoever wins that game.
Yeah.
So we probably play Texas twice this year, and this time at least it gets to be in Atlanta as opposed to having to drive out to Texas. But I think that's pretty good. I mean, that just means
I think they'll get in either way. I think the loser gets in either way this time. I hope before. So. But you're right. It's not an advantage because it's like you play the same amount of games as you would if you don't get the bye in the playoff, except you don't get the home playoff game.
Yeah.
You got to play the playoff game in the probably Atlanta again if you win.
Yeah.
I feel like it can. The committee is saying a loss in a conference championship is not going to hurt a team, but it hurt us last year.
Yeah, I think it will.
I don't believe them.
I don't believe them either.
So I don't know, man. So anything good? Anything fun?
Yeah, we got this week. I like this week.
It's a good week.
Family week and off of work. And we're having brothers coming to town with family.
It's a good time.
So yeah, spending a couple of days. So
sweet.
Yeah, it's gonna be nice this weekend. I'm gonna get some time on the tractor. So
nice.
It's gonna be good.
Can't beat that. Absolutely. Well, man, it's time to shake and bake. Let's do it.
Shake and bake.
Shake and bake. Shake and then bake. Shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
It's shake and bake time. Shake and bake, buddy. Shake it before you bake it.
You got to shake it before you bake it. We have some dear listeners who brought a shake and bake racing flag in, so gotta hang the shake and bake racing flag. That's awesome. So thank you, Riggins. Appreciate you guys bringing that in. That's pretty awesome. So today we want to really chop up a topic that I think is sensitive, and I have to be very careful here to just emotionally and watch my tear flow a little bit here. But the topic we want to talk about protecting our children from trauma. And here's what really spurred this for me. I love podcasts like Spoken Media. It's never going to go away because humans have to communicate. So you either take advantage of that medium or you don't. And I think, in fact, right now we're at a time in history where spoken media, we've learned, has massively influenced an election. Younger audiences listen to long-form podcasts. They're not soundbite driven as much as soundbites are hooks. It's like it's the worm on the hook. And so soundbites get people to go listen, and people still do listen to long form media. We've learned that as a reality. And so, and I think there's a ton of content out there, some of it good, some of it not so good. But one of the things I do in listening to that is a consistent theme. And men who have served in combat roles in our military, but also men who've served in big business roles, a consistent theme in every single one of their lives is some manner of physical or sexual trauma that happened to them when they were a child. And it comes up over and over and over and over again. And it hit me the other day. I was listening to another one, and Sean Ryan was, he digs in. He wants to tell your life story. Part of his thing is chronicling people's lives. Because he wants them to tell the story. This generation who has fought wars, they've been successful in various things, and they've come from hard places. I can't think of one I've listened to where there wasn't some form of physical or sexual trauma. And it made me start thinking, what is going on? And so, and then that speaks to me because I have the unfortunate dark providence of that sitting in my background as a child, both physical and sexual trauma at the hands of other people. And so that influenced an awful lot of what we did as parents. My wife did not have that, but I came to our relationship with that baggage. And one of the things I wanted to make sure is we didn't put our kids in a position to have happen to them what happened to me. Yeah. Now, I just want to be clear, it was not the hands of my parents. That was the hands of other people. And my parents did the very best they could do with what they had. And there's just cultural norms that they were just part of, that you just participated in and never asked questions. And I always felt like I couldn't tell them. So for whatever reason, it was a shame factor. There was a fear factor on certain parts that if I did this, I knew this would happen. So you just try to mitigate the garbage. And what's crazy is how a 6, 7, and 8-year-old kid instinctively knows or learns or has to learn how to survive. But that's not normal. That should not be the case. God so wired our brains and our central nervous systems to fight, flight, freeze, fawn, fib, do what we have to do to survive. But the question for us parents is, how do we prevent our kids having to learn that skill that early? Because there's nothing, but God is good, gracious, and kind. And he works all things to the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Even the darkest, hardest providences on the face of the planet. However, just because God does that is not an excuse for us to throw that verse out there as an excuse to do whatever we want and let our kids just, well, you can be traumatized. Okay, God will work it out for good. That's irresponsible. And so we wanted to make sure we did some things differently. And so if that is a prevalent issue, was for me, was for all these guys, my hunch is it is for a lot of people who've probably never said anything about it. And I didn't say anything about it. I told Jennifer early on in our relationship, I didn't tell her everything. As things evolved, you had kids and certain things would come up, I would share more. And I didn't fully share everything until the past 3 to 4 years as I kind of went over the edge with some stuff. And so I thought, well, shouldn't we talk about that? Yeah. Because if that's happened in my life and all these lives people who keep coming on to the point that Sean Ryan's, with very colorful and salty language asking like, what's going on? Why are all of my guests having the same experience? It's like, okay, there's some rooted issues there. And so we'll talk about how do we protect our kids from trauma. So I've got some very specific things. I know you do. And John, I know you've got some thoughts on this, but before I run through my list of things to do, let's unpack a little bit that issue. As parents, our responsibility to protect our kids from trauma.
Yeah. Man, I'll tell you, I think I got to be careful because I don't think no matter what, we're sinful, right? So getting it right is almost impossible on this side of eternity. So I mean, exactly right.
Yeah.
So some way or another, you're going to try my best to do things opposite of what my parents did. And not saying that my parents did everything exactly wrong, but I learned from a lot of that stuff that I've applied to how I raised Elena. So I just really careful about saying that we have the right things, you know?
Yeah.
Because I think you just sometimes can overcorrect as well. Mm-hmm. And so in that, I've been careful about, you know, thinking back about how I was raised and in that, and just adding in some extra protections because I knew what I went through. So it's just extra protections. And I think that, to me, honestly, man, when we talk about generational sin, you can kill that. Yeah. And you can kill it one generation at a time. Mm-hmm. And the things that we do with our kids kills generational sin from our past. And so, and there's some things that I have to live with, you know, for forever. And my sin that I've done, you know, divorce, right. That's a sin, right? That's going to have an effect on Elena, regardless of whether I think it is or not. It is going to have an effect. And so how do I combat that? Man, I'm just wide open with her. Like sure. we talk about hard things. Yeah. And man, I don't remember my parents really talking about hard things with us. Like literally she could ask me anything that she wants, and I'm not going to shy away from answering the question. Now, sure. I think you have to filter it right. Yeah. You know, you're not going to talk to, you know, right. a 13-year-old girl like you talk to a 50-year-old man. Right. But yeah, so I think that first part is just really having an open space where she can just ask good questions, you know?
Yeah, that's good. That's huge. Yeah, being comfortable with your parents. I think you've done a great job because Elena is a part of a lot of our conversations, and she has been since she's been little, so she's privy. Elena's here with us. It's hard not to look at her. She's over there smiling. So I'm being also careful what I say because Elena's in the room. Like, you've raised her talking about difficult, challenging things.
Yeah.
But you've been very careful how you do that as well. So she is very astute and ready to handle that kind of stuff. Yeah. I think a lot of parents haven't done that. There's a component, and not that we're poo-pooing on parents or parenting, because here's part of our challenge as parents. We wrestle through guilt and shame because our question is, what happens when you do all the things, all the culturally prescribed things, and still it wasn't enough?
Yep.
Because I don't think we overcorrected. I think we undercorrected in some places. Like, we really don't know the answer to that, but even our best efforts resulted in massive hurt that happened to our kids that started in places we thought boundaries were up enough to prevent that, and they weren't.
Yeah.
And so overcorrecting doesn't necessarily fix the problem because you can do all the right things and still. And by the way, let me back up. Let me put a bookmark there and say when I'm talking trauma, I mean some type of event that has caused the human brain that God designed to be our survival tool, the central nervous system, to correct in such a manner that the neural pathways in the brain have been affected in such a manner that downstream function of the individual is affected heretofore, right? And so hard things are going to happen to everybody. Because trauma starts registering in utero. We know that biologically, neurologically, trauma registers in utero. And through the first 2 years of life, that neurological function of that child is set in the patterns and habits from in utero to outside life. And so we're talking that kind of trauma that causes the brain to respond differently than normal circumstances and situations. And so us preventing those kind of things. And so us being able to put the right kind of fences up and still, though, be able to wrestle with, go back to the bookmark, what happens to us when our best efforts don't work out. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a downstream thing, and I'm asking that question now because that may be a different podcast. But what happens when you do all the right stuff and still is injected? And because then it's like you can overcorrect, you can undercorrect, you can get it just right, and it still don't work. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean we don't try, and that's kind of what we're here to do, is trying to figure out how to do that.
Well, and part of that is, whether, grateful and lucky to grow up, with two very loving, very present parents, but whether we come from a great set of parents who did everything well or most everything well to a situation where they don't, we still can't parent that way because the world is just so different. And we have to acknowledge that. I mean, even from where a lot of the trauma is either happening during or was set up through electronic means and through media, through video games, through the internet, stuff that we didn't have to deal with because that wasn't there, to simple things of like what you were talking about earlier is like just even going to a neighbor's house or a relative's house or doing sleepovers, stuff that we did pretty often, and I did when growing up, with people, because there was more trust because there was less reasons not to trust back then, just like I could run around the neighborhood, just be back by dark, right? And there was never like whereas my 9-year-old getting out on the other side of the car makes me uneasy sometimes because I have to worry about some van pulling up and and trying to snatch her in midday. And so it's a different world. I think we have to acknowledge that, number one, and realize, okay, we can't parent the same way that people have in the past because that's just not effective to what the culture and the society we're in now. Number two, I think so much is put an emphasis on how to deal with trauma after it's done, right, as opposed to I think that's why it's important we're talking in this conversation is no one really talks a lot about protection on the front end. We just assume everybody's doing what they can do, and we hope it works out. But there are a lot of things that we could do to help that. Just the same way, I don't know if anybody who's gone through chiropractic care, right? They preach, if you wait till symptoms to come to see the doctor, you're kind of doing it wrong. Like it may be irreparable. But one of the things that chiropractic care does well is it's kind of helping you set up on the front end to stay healthy and to be healthy and to try to avoid some of those things. That may or may not be a good example, but in the same way, parenting, we've got to be more cognizant on the front end. Yeah. And that's what we want to talk about today is some strategies and some ways to do that while knowing you could do the best job ever. And there are still horrible people in the world trying to do horrible things. Yeah. And I think that's the hard part, whether it's, worrying about is the next school shooting going to be at the one that my wife and daughter are at to, is someone staking out my house to do, to plan a break-in, just stuff that years ago we'd be like, oh, you're just living in fear. Today, those are like, we would be stupid not to at least be aware of those things that are happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things I'm going to throw this first strategy out is become crazy aware that most of the trauma in the world happens by the hands of someone you either trust or are close to in proximity or relationship. The assumption that because it's easy to think worst case scenarios, like somebody we don't know, like the worst stuff happens, but most of the trauma happens at the hands of a trusted person or a family member, somebody that's close by, which is interesting. Like even in murder investigations, they will tell you 90+% of the time they begin with people who knew them intimately, because usually what leads to murder is some relational stress. And so unfortunately, what happens in physical trauma and other kinds of emotional traumas is it's at the hands of someone who's nearby or close. And so that's, or at an institution you trusted. And so that's the awareness, is that just because I know or trust doesn't remove the possibility of trauma. Yeah. That's scary to me, but I can speak for my background. It was an institution, individual that were trusted. And so just because we have this sense of trust with somebody or an institution doesn't mean that all is okay. Yeah. And so there has to be some things we put in place to have the relational connection to your child so that they're comfortable in going, this happened to me. And so be aware. So here's my first strategy. Be aware of your sense of trust. What are you trusting and why are you trusting it?
Yeah, man. When Elena was in school, she's homeschooled now, but when she was in school, I was always surprised at how fast parents were allowing their kids to go spend the night with one another. Yeah. Dude, it was like instantaneously, you were there 2 months in school, you just get to know this person. You don't even know the parents, and they're saying they're wanting to do sleepovers. I'm like, no. Yeah. Right. Absolutely not. Yeah. It's like we're very and even me and her mom have always been aligned on that, like very cautious about at least for overnights. You know, I mean, when you have those situations where you know, you get in pajamas, you know, you get in different situations that you're just a little bit more intimate than you would be in a regular setting. You know, I mean, that just speaking openly, but man, we're just really careful about that. Yeah. And it's okay as parents just to say no.
Yeah, that's right.
And if your kids don't think and understand that, then explain it to them. Like, sit them down, explain it to them why you're saying no. Just be like, it has nothing to do with that individual person. We just don't know them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So take the time, and it takes a lot of work to get to know people.
It does.
It takes, you know, and you have to lean in. But yeah, man, just being really careful with that.
We refused to do the spend the night thing. It's always, you know, as I got older, it resulted in more having to be conflict is not the right word, but it'd be more questions of why. Mm-hmm. And then the older they got, the more explicit you could become. But, you know, a story, and this is true, I'm not telling anything that's not been published, but a New York Times columnist, a guy named Jonathan Merritt. You guys ever heard of Jonathan Merritt? His dad
sounds familiar.
Yeah. You'll know his name's James Merritt. He used to be the pastor of First Baptist Snellville, Georgia, and he's a pastor of a church in the metro Atlanta area. Okay. Nothing but huge respect for James Merritt. Good man, man of God. I mean, nothing but huge respect. He's done nothing wrong. He's just one of those stalwarts you look at and go, yeah, I want to be like that when I'm in my 60s, following the Lord, doing the good stuff. But Jonathan, when he came out about his sexual orientation pre-COVID at some point back, he shared the story, and I think it was in the New Yorker, it was a New York Times article he wrote about where that questioning began was in their neighbor's house at the hands of a man who was a deacon in their father's church. Mm-hmm. They were a neighbor and a deacon. And so they were trusted. Yeah. It was a spend the night situation with the deacon's friend. And so even in places where there was an earned trust, Jonathan's psyche was destroyed for multiple years that led to him himself saying he thinks he can trace that orientation confusion back to that. And so even in places where there's an earned trust, there's this sense in which and I'm not going to say yes or no for every parent. You got to figure out, but for us, we're not going to spend the night. Why? This whole concept of, you can go, we can hang out, be in places where you're not alone with the adult or alone with an older teenager, but there's no need to spend the night. Like that makes, and it'd be curious to me, where did that even come from? Because I'm sure Laura back in, Little House on the Prairie days, wasn't hossing for Pa to take the mule and the wagon, 20 miles down into town to spend the night with Nellie. Like nobody was doing that garbage. So where did that come from? You know what I mean?
All these analogies you could have used.
Yeah, it's like, what in the world?
Yeah, dude, I go back to Little House on the Prairie a lot. That's Little House in my mind, Little House on the Prairie. But really, where did that come from? The whole spend the night culture? Because I'm quite certain back in the day they weren't hossing to go spend the night on each other's farms.
Yeah.
So where did this come from? That it just become culturally acceptable that we should just socialize our kids by spending the night at each other's house. Again, parents, do what you're going to do, but I'm just saying you need to be aware that an awful lot of bad things happen at spend the nights. Mm-hmm. My son's friends can tell stories of their first exposure to pornography spending the night at somebody's house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can tell you from spending the night at people's houses, because we didn't have digital format, but seeing things in magazine form that my friends' dads had that they found and then exposed us to. And I'm going, there was no redemptive benefit to spending the night at anybody's house growing up ever for me.
100%.
And I'm going, why do we do that? And I would say as Christian parents, don't offer it. I was going to be bold. This isn't preaching. This is one of the reasons I like doing podcasts. We say whatever the heck we want to say. And you don't have to listen. You can go listen to Joe Rogan if you want to. You can go listen to Sean Ryan. You can go whoever you want to listen to, but just don't even offer it. Don't put other parents in a position to have to offend you by you thinking that they think you're not trustworthy, that you don't let their kids spend the night.
Just don't be offended.
Or just don't be offended.
If the no is no, it's like, cool, I understand that.
And here's another thing. Easy. Yeah, well, this would be another podcast. Like, why are we so easily offendable?
Golly.
Why can't we just be able to say true things to each other and trust that you love me? We can do that.
Yeah.
Like, you can say true things to me and I'm going to be offended by it. We may argue.
Yeah.
But
we've had some good arguments.
Yeah, we've had some really good arguments. Yeah. But it results in deeper relationship. But, man, we shouldn't even have to be worried about being offended if I don't let my kid go spend the night at church member X's house. Mm-hmm. You should just be okay with it.
That's right.
And I'm just going to, and I'd say we didn't put families in a position to have to make them feel uncomfortable by telling us no. We weren't going to let our kids do it, and we weren't going to invite other kids to come to our house either.
Yep.
I mean, you could come spend some time, and you can go to your house and spend some time, but we're not spending the night.
Yeah, man.
I think a good point earlier, John, what you were talking about, and this we'll get into some attachment parenting here in a minute, but it really comes back to that. It's because you've intentionally developed that attachment, but also that openness and that trust between you and Elena, that freedom to come. One of the worst things we do as parents could do as parents is not allow sending our kids to ask hard questions elsewhere, because we didn't pour enough into that relationship to invite, or because we were afraid to answer those questions when they came. Different ages, as mine is 4 years younger. So while we do have that, there's still a bit of some things we have to be like, she's not ready for some of those conversations.
Yeah, you just filter it. You make it age appropriate, but you can answer the questions.
Right. Yeah. But we are constantly saying, hey, if you have a question, you come to us. Don't go to your friend or your teacher at school, because that's happened, and it's
I guarantee if they're asking you that question, they're asking their friends that question. Yeah. And which one do you want answered?
Oh, exactly.
Right.
Right. So don't shy away. If your kids are asking questions, it means they're curious.
Yeah, that's right.
If their curiosity is up, they got the internet, they got friends, they got all kinds of places to find the wrong answers.
Yeah. Right.
And you need to be able to answer that question as a parent and be okay with it.
You can either be afraid and stumble through it and try to get through a tough answer, or they're going to go search somewhere else. Who knows what they're going to find.
There's been some questions that I'm like, oh, goodness.
Yeah.
I don't even, okay, give me a minute.
Because I'm sure, especially for guys, you ask questions to your buddies growing up and probably got some of the dumbest answers ever, but you probably believe some of them until you knew it better, because you were like, he knows what he's talking about.
I have answers sitting in my head now. I'm like, oh man, that was a third grade answer. Clearly, it's not true.
There was some value in sleepovers if you come to pranks and talking about certain things late at night. But
what was Opie? What was in Andy Griffith's show? Was it Johnny Paul?
Man, do you watch current shows?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
You still got black and white 3 channels, don't you?
I still watch Andy Griffith's show. My gosh, I do. It's awesome. It's incredible.
Sucker's still getting paid for reruns. You know that?
Yes, and he ought to. They were wholesome family shows. But Opie always talked about Paul. Jon Paul said, or Johnny, but I think it's Johnny Paul. Johnny Paul was sort of the go-to guy in elementary school that Opie and all the Johnny Paul said. So anyway, I was like,
he's going to quote Bonanza next.
By God. Hey, Hoss Cartwright was a good man. I don't care what anybody says. See? Man, if y'all ain't watching that good TV, y'all probably watching garbage. Y'all need to repent. Y'all probably watch Yellowstone, don't you?
Oh, no, I do not.
Yeah,
that's
good. Oof.
Man. I watched like one little clip of that, and I'm like, daggone.
All they do is cuss.
Hey, that's another good one. Like, what's your kids watching?
Yeah, right.
Man.
What do you let them watch, right?
Now, listen, I made some mistakes now.
Yeah, I have to.
You know?
Yeah. We saw Tommy Boy far too soon.
Dude, those movies that we watched as kids. Yeah. And then you go back, I'm thinking in my head, I was like, oh, it's not so bad. I was like, well, no, Laney can watch this. She's 13. We can watch this. Turn it on, and literally 10 minutes in, I'm like, trying to find the off button.
Yeah.
I was like, holy, what? No.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Right? Yeah.
You remember the movie? For me, I have a specific movie in mind, but the ones you watched, it was on like TBS as a kid, and the first time you watched it on like DVD, and you were like, for me, it was Stripes. I was like, none of this was in the version I was watching with my parents in my high school, and you watch the DVD, you're like, oh my goodness,
yeah, man,
different.
Yeah.
But it's a similar way. Yeah, you're right. It's and I'm guilty of that too, because Madison likes to watch Big Bang Theory and The Office, and I have to be very careful sometimes. But I've made the mistake of just like leaving it on, and there's certain things come on, and I have to, that's just my bad of like. Most of it's fine, but that with that 10%, and
well, it's situational, right? And
and
it's the bull and the frog thing, right?
Yeah,
just a little bit, and it don't matter. But seeing that at a young age, and then you become okay with those things, and it's like it's not okay.
Yeah, one of the movements among a lot of people now is, and I'll say this is one of my strategies later, but it's about phone usage. But a lot of families are learning to cut TV out. Cut it off, cut it out, limit it, because just what we're finding neurobiologically, this is not just innately Christian, it's just neurobiology, is visual media is good and it's bad. Like it's got a good benefit, and too much of it results in some really bad things. And so just how the brain functions, just the functioning of the brain, including affecting the capacity to read and comprehend, not counting the content. So when you add content to the shaping of the brain's ability to read and comprehend, then we're shaping futures.
Yeah.
And so we got to think about that. So talk about attachment, because I think even if we avoid major things, one of the things I think parents overlook, because there hasn't been an awful lot of neurobiology from a Christian worldview applied to parenting in utero and at birth, that we are learning now is affecting a kid's trauma. Even if they avoid stuff way down the line, we're finding trauma behaviors in kids because of in utero and first 2-year parenting styles. And so one of the things we're finding, particularly through the study of brains and children from hard places, is the effect of attachment in regard to the severity of their trauma. So tell us a little bit about attachment, and because I think this is super important place to start and not overlook.
Well, especially because I don't know, a lot of our listeners have newborns or other ones on the way, and that's really where this starts. So really the first coining of attachment theory dates back to 1958. Psychologist Jon Bowlby believed that infants had an innate need to attach with their caregivers, and that this need to form close attachment is an evolved response that increases their chance of survival. But basically, for proper attachment from birth teaches trust, and trust is the heartbeat of attachment. So to kind of simplify it there, and the first year of life is so crucial because the bonding process between parent and child, through mirroring things like smiles and cooing to feeling the warmth of, the reason we talk about skin to skin attachment with child and mother, and even child and father at the beginning, because there's the feeling warmth, there's hearing that heartbeat, there's hearing joy in mom and dad's sounds. All those things are crucial. Most of us wouldn't consider that like a theory or a practice. We just do those things naturally, but there's a very specific intentional reasons behind that. Babies discover the joys of bonding and attachment, and how to behave in synchrony with other humans. And it's actually a phenomenon that psychologists call matching, where a parent and a child synchronize their behavior, continually mimicking and mirroring each other, right? I mean, you probably did that with your mom or dad. My dad would like turn his head over, and then I would do that. Even simple things like that. That mirroring creates trust, and it creates that attachment and grows that, everything from eye contact to body movement, et cetera. So the next year, and I'm kind of skipping through a lot here, so I'm just trying to give a brief overview for those that are like, oh my goodness, he's already on year 2. But the next year of life, so you got that's really the first year of life. And there's a lot of science that even says that up until about age 1, babies really only have 2 emotions. They have fear and lack of fear. Now, those things imitate things like happiness, but happiness is just absence of fear as a baby, which is where trust builds that. So the next year of life is really all about boundaries. So children in a healthy, loving home quickly learn, as they start to test those boundaries, that the parents are in charge and are trustworthy. And this sets them up for higher levels of development, especially in things like processing language, social situations. And, despite what they may say, children they need and they crave boundaries that are consistent and enforced, even though today's age, there's just as many things, going on where we're not setting those boundaries. And so, practically speaking, that's kind of just a broad overview of attachment theory. It's really all about creating trust and about creating this safety feeling so that the child's not having to live in survival mode, because it's all about dependence early on. And what we learn is a child who learns, child cries and then the parent meets that need, it's kind of the circle of trust, right? The child cries because they have a need. Parent tries to identify that need. Parent meets that need. Child learns trust. And then that just continues on. And then it goes on, and we start from that dependence behavior to a kind of a codependence where, now at a certain age, child needs a snack. Parent learns, will help them. Instead, not just get the snack, but hey, here's where the Cheez-Its are, or the goldfish are. Here's where the bowls are. You come don't get too much, don't get too little. It's that codependence. And we start to kind of train and teach, right? Yeah. And all that's attachment, all that's based on trust. And we could go on for that forever. But really the heartbeat of that is trust. And being able for that child to trust that their needs are going to be met. But when they don't learn that, then they begin to pull away, that trust is not there. Distrust builds, and then distrust teaches that my crying out does not meet my need. So that's when you get children, even at babies who they stop crying. Some of I worked with children who were like 4 and 5 whose tear ducts had almost dried up because they refused to cry because that was their learned behavior, that crying doesn't get me anything. So eventually I had to stop because I'm not getting the attention that I need, not getting the needs met. So. Yeah.
It's fascinating. There is this research has been done. It's really hard to watch, but some of Bowlby's research, they trialed some of this stuff with monkeys and chimpanzees, and they would be separated from their mother at birth, and they put them in these cages where they had a wire monkey dressed up. It wasn't a real monkey, but it's kind of it's clear to the human looking at it, it's like not a monkey. But these chimpanzees would crave trying to get up to that wire monkey and cozy up to it. And what they found over the life of those chimpanzees that didn't have the live mother, they actually developed psychotic behavior and insane. And so what you see, extrapolating that to the human, is that when the need wasn't met and there wasn't a close attachment, it develops neurological psychoses far down the line. And so what happens is it's easy to develop some type of parenting skill set, either out of frustration or learned, that doesn't respond to the child. And if we don't respond to the child, what we're doing is we're setting their central nervous system up to be larger than their actual other functions of their brain. In fact, we already know now that a kid doesn't have the capacity to logically think until age 3. So they're not logically putting anything together. They're not learning logic. They're incapable of it. It's their central nervous system does not connect to their frontal lobe till 3, sometimes a little after. And so that response, that attachment, Karen Purvis wrote a couple books on this called The Connected Child, The Connected Parent. Absolutely huge. She's a Christian. So I encourage people, as you're having these babies, before you adopt a strategy for how you're going to deal with all the life now with a child, go read a couple of those books and be informed. Don't just assume anything, because attachment is key to preventing trauma, because trauma is light and heavy. In fact, the brain registers physical abuse and neglect the exact same way. Like they know the human brain does not distinguish between neglect and physical abuse. Exact same pain.
Yeah.
And so if we're not responding and connecting, that child is feeling it's a neglect. They feel whether it's right or wrong. We're going to feed them and care for them. They don't know that. That's that trust component. And what we're doing is we're introducing mild traumas and fractures. And so I just encourage parents, do some reading.
Yeah. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking let's bring this back to some reality. Because, man, being a parent is stinking hard.
It's hard.
Daggum babies cry all the time.
Yep.
You know, and man, and I think that you can I believe everything that y'all just that we're saying. Absolutely. But, man, I think when you take it to the certain point, some of these mamas start feeling bad about themselves because they can't comfort their babies. And, man, it's like, man, I remember Elena. Man, she cried, gosh, probably the first 6 or 7 months of her life, like literally all the time. And I mean, it was like testing our mental health.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's almost, and there was a couple times, to be straight, skinny, honest, man. Like, there was a couple times I was like, I have no idea what else to do. So I put her in her crib and I walked out of the room and I was like, you're just going to have to cry for a minute. I got to take a mental break because I'm literally, you know, and I think that's the kind of stuff that as a parent, you have to figure out your child. You figure out what they need. Every one of them's different. And you can read books and you got to learn your kid. And it takes a minute, you know, and I don't want the mamas who are, they're really striving to do it right. And there's some that struggle with the fact that they know all of these things that, and they're so fearful of doing something wrong, you know, and creating this trauma in their babies, but they're doing it right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Parenting's hard. I always tell parents when they're struggling, I'm like, you didn't get into this because you thought this was going to be a freaking vacation. Right. Parenting is hard. And if anybody told you this was easy, they lied to you and you know it now.
Yeah.
This is why. It just is what it is. There's a reason 50-year-olds aren't afraid to wear sockos anymore. We quit caring 20 years ago. And the reason we did is because we raised babies. Well, we don't care if we match because we're wore out. It's hard. If you have children, you're not going to be cool.
Yeah.
It's over.
Yep.
And so what you're doing when you have children is I'm committing the grand majority of my time to making sure I do the absolute best. And so I think what has happened is there's been this injection that this is supposed to be easy. And if it's not easy, I'm doing something wrong.
Man, spot
And
on.
so
That's right.
The reality is, no, this is hard.
Yeah.
And the greatest regrets I have are, I knew this stuff. My wife's got a degree in this stuff. So we came into this understanding attachment. It was still hard.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would say it was harder. What I wanted to do was quit. And what I had to do was understand, like, I'm not going to sleep tonight. It just is what it is. And so I'm going to put you on my back and we're going for a walk in the neighborhood. There were times I walked a lot with a kid strapped on my back in a backpack because it just is what it is. My wife needed to sleep. She couldn't nurse anymore. She's tired, and it's just my job. And so I think it's unavoidable that parents are going to feel guilty. And they're going to struggle. And so what I would say is if you're feeling guilty and struggling, you're doing a lot right. So just don't quit, but also don't be ignorant.
Yeah, right.
Like, know the right stuff and strive to because here's what some couples are asking us questions offline because they're curious, like what they've been told and what they're doing is causing problems. And so they will come and ask privately, well, what do you know? Because they know we teach the TBRI here for traumatized kids and all the stuff we do. And so we have a lot of conversations offline. And one of the things I say to them is, if you do A, B, and C, it's not going to have an immediate impact. It may get harder. But if you do A, B, and C, and you get to age 13, 14, and 15, and they are not rebelling against you, it will be worth all those sleepless nights because you'll still be sleeping. It's better to sleep at 13, 14, and 15 than it is to not, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's better to sleep in teenage years than it is to sleep in baby years because that's really when the rubber meets the road. Because when they're little, you still got control. But and this is a component too with attachment I find fascinating. Rebellion is a uniquely Western civilization phenomenon. You don't find teen rebellion in Eastern countries. And one of the things I noticed when we're overseas working with our friend, their children sleep in proximity to them without ever having taken a parenting course. They've never read a parenting book.
Yeah.
And it's not a Christian subculture thing. It's that country, that people group thing. And you know what those kids don't do? They don't disrespect their family. They don't disrespect their parents, and they don't rebel.
Yeah.
And so I think that's fascinating that where we value distance from our kids and getting rid of them because we're wore out, we deal with the distance when they're 13, 14, 15, and 16 because we set the pattern of distance when they were little.
Yeah.
And so therefore the rebellion kicks in. It's like, I don't respect you. I don't honor you. And we're curious. I'm convinced it's a neurological pattern we set when we don't respond to them when they're little. And I think, so it's going to be hard, expect it to be difficult, but know as much as you can possibly know. And in 20 years, we're going to learn more.
Yeah.
So there's no such thing as parenting that isn't regret-free.
Yeah, it's like just practice.
Yeah, it's practice.
Which means you're going to fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, part of that attachment process is knowing your child. So, like, I'm glad you brought that up because teaching your child to self-soothe is not neglectful.
Yeah,
so I hope people hear that.
Yeah.
It's not like you need to be always holding your child, never let them do anything, wrap them in bubble wrap. But you can't go the other end either and just be like, always let them just scream for days and days.
Yeah.
So it's learning your child, learning their tendencies, just like you learn what the different cries mean. Like, do you know that there's a hungry cry? You don't learn that day one. I mean,
it was the first 2 weeks.
Change the dry diaper because just going through all of the possibilities.
The first 2 weeks we starved Elena to death. We didn't even know it. I mean, it was literally like we didn't know she was just wouldn't get enough food.
Yeah.
You know, and and when you figure that out, was why she was crying all the time.
She was
like,
hungry.
she's thinking hungry. She's like, feed me. And we're like, I don't know what to do.
I realized working in the field that I worked in for over a decade, being at DFACS and how many investigations I had done and child removals from homes I had done to, being in foster care stuff. When you work in that forever, it affects you. And so, like, I can't, like, for a while, I would walk into Addison's room in the crib just hoping she's still alive, like hoping she didn't like get caught up in her blanket. I'm like, I was nervous about anything like co-sleeping, which, and those are decisions parents make that I don't agree that either one is necessarily wrong, but like just working in that field, I think the few times I spanked, it was probably like, like you bet, I was just because, when you work in that field, it's like, you got to be careful. Don't leave a mark on the child. And I was so enamored by that there's one day I realized I was like, man, I'm being too easy on things. Not necessarily a bad thing, but again, you have to kind of learn those. And one of the things we talk about with trauma, particularly, and I've got this later on, is in order for you to help prevent and protect your children from trauma, you've got to deal with your own. And you've also got to know how, more importantly, how that has affected you and how it affects the way that you parent.
Yeah, spot on.
And so that's a big piece whenever, like when I'm training parents, it's like, it's not just, don't just know that you had trauma. You need to understand how that's affecting your parenting. And then once you learn that, then you learn how that impacts your child and their development. Because if that's impacting it negatively, it's not just being aware of it. It's not okay. You've also got to understand what the repercussions of that are, and then make those changes.
Yeah, dude, it's like in business. If you can't lead yourself, you're not leading others.
Right. That's right. I realized it's too late. It's too late because I taught my kids this by habit, but a quick fuse was a function of of the stuff for me. A very quick fuse. I learned to survive very early in life, and so I had a quick fuse. Quick fuse is how I survived. That's how I got out of the situations I was in. My parents never knew. They never knew till they were much older. And so I passed that quick fuse on. and so in how I parented them, it'd be a quick fuse. And so not surprised, the Jolly Boys have a very quick fuse. Like, how'd that happen? It's like, well, I'll see. So it's like
just talking about being our dads earlier.
There you go. And they are, but it's being aware. And the awareness of processing my junk affected how they process stuff.
Yeah.
Which affects habits that they have today that I passed on, which is so wild. The Lord says, if you do these things, third and fourth generation, there's a component of dealing with stuff down the line. It's epigenetics, it's DNA, but it's also habits. It's learned in our actions, and those two work together. So it's being aware. If we can handle our mess, then we're breaking cycles. I hate to say, some people may disagree with language, but family curse like stuff, that kind of stuff that you break by being aware of your own stuff, breaking that cycle, then your children carry
I
on.
think it's the emotional. My brother and I talk about it a lot. We're dads, so we were raised like men don't cry, right? So we had to take a minute to even find our emotions. Like when the first time that I cried, I was like, what is this salty discharge coming from my eyes?
My eyes are sweating.
I don't
How did
know
that
what
happen?
this is.
Sweaty eyes.
Yeah, and now it's like, now I cry just about at everything. And it's like, so I flipped and I'm like, man, where did I find the balance here, Lord? Like, come on.
Yeah. I think that's good. We're you and I are very similar in that we cry. We cry a lot. And it's like we've tapped in, man.
And I can still feel it, man. When I cry, I can still hear that inside going, man, you're such a wimp.
Yeah.
I'm serious. Like it's like ingrained in me. It's like, no, I'm not a wimp.
No, that's the human's way of processing complex emotions.
Yeah. It was like Stuart Smalley standing in front of the mirror.
I'm good
enough. Smart enough.
Addison asked me literally a week or two ago, she's like, Dad, how come you never cry? And I was like, oh, I do, but it took me a minute. I was like, I don't know that I've ever cried like in front of her.
Yeah.
Like it might be like at night in the bed or the car or something, like, dealing with something. But it was just one of those questions that I didn't expect, not like a life altering question, but just something to kind of process. And I'm like, because I want her to know that it's okay to.
Yeah.
But that's not something I do a lot. Certainly not in view of others.
Well, man, I tell you, like,
not that I'm against it.
Girls marry like someone that's aligned with their dad. That's what they look for in who they marry. I want Elena to marry someone that's got a little bit of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I was zero.
Yeah.
10 or 15 years ago. I mean, she's felt a lot of that.
Elena's giving the hearty amen over there in the corner.
She is. Yeah, she knows, and she knows I battle it. And and another thing that you just talk to her about it, like you share those things of what's going on internally. That's another thing to combat it. You know?
Let me give you guys two that I think are important as you get older kids. And if you have a blended family, like racially blended, this is something to be aware of. So these kind of go hand in hand. If you got older kids or you got a situation, and I'm going to be vague because I don't want to get super specific here, but depending on what your kids are involved in, sometimes we have this societal expectation that if you're sports or whatever thing you do fundraisers. One of the fundraisers that usually happens is you sell these discount cards. If you send black young men with a stack of discount cards into a predominantly upper middle class white neighborhood to go sell cards, to knock on doors, you can't be surprised. It shouldn't happen. But the whole shouldn't, I've learned to quit thinking shouldn't. Start expecting, right? Don't expect that there won't be some people who will respond negatively to that in such a manner that creates fear on the part of those young men that they weren't expecting that.
Yeah.
If they come to the door with a gun, or they come to the door with an attitude and say horrible negative things, don't think that those young men don't respond to that on the inside. So as you got older kids in those situations, be aware of social situations that institutions or individuals may put them in that can do harm to them. Either physically, you know what I'm saying? Like if you send a bunch of black kids into a predominantly upper white middle class neighborhood, walking up to doors and knocking, don't be surprised if they come back with negative experiences. In other words, don't do that. If you got to raise funds, find a way to protect the young men and young women that you're asking to raise funds. We're just so it's easy to go sell cards, so go sell cards, but you don't think in terms of we're putting them in a situation to be vulnerable as teenagers. And so as you got teenagers, be aware of that kind of stuff. It's a social situation that can contribute either to physical harm or just the harm of having somebody in a very elevated manner threaten you. Then what do we do if they respond to that threat?
Yeah.
We put them in that situation to respond to that threat. So be aware of that. And then the second one, I go hand in hand in that. Be aware of your institutions in school, where our institutions put adults, 18-year-old, where they're considered adults, whether they are or not. That's a different debate. But adults in a situation with minors, where if a minor institutes a situation where a minor kicks something off and the adult responds, the adult gets prosecuted like an adult, the minor walks. We can testify to that personally in our household. Where a minor kicks something off, the legal adult responds, the legal adult is the one that gets charged. Because the institution isn't concerned with the welfare of the student, they're just concerned with the welfare of themselves. And so institutions will guard themselves at the traumatic events of the child. And so I would say be socially aware of situations where you think all is well, boundaries are up, when in fact all is not well and boundaries are not up. So just know. And unfortunately, God has put us in positions to, and I'm so sick of this. Lord, I'm sorry, but I'm tired of going first. I'm tired of always having to be the one that has to experience the negative consequences of trusting institutions and individuals that end up blowing back on us. So as parents, just be aware.
Yeah.
Be aware. Not all social situations that institutions and individuals put our kids in are safe and effective. And so it can blow back on you. So parents, just beware.
And be informed. Know what's happening, and even to the point of researching common trends, things like that, especially for older kids, like you said. That's the stuff you don't think about.
Think about locker rooms when you put 18-year-olds in locker rooms with 16-year-olds. One's an adult legally, one's not. And we all know what happens in locker rooms. Well, now with cell phones, pictures, social media, parents.
And it doesn't have to be an adult and a minor.
No, it doesn't.
Minors.
Yeah, just a bunch of minors. But the unfortunate thing is minors get a slap on the wrist and the adults get big boy charges.
But the trauma's still there.
But the trauma's still there.
Yeah. So what you're looking at is, all that, and man, the locker room is a big problem.
It's a big problem. And so you got there. Yeah, I'm going to get any more explicit than that, because that's just a physical situation. But there are sexual issues that happen. And Floyd County has some people who've been in Floyd County a long time. We can think of 2 particular instances of assault that happens sexually in locker rooms in our high schools. And so you cannot assume that the institution is protecting your kid. I would say, I'm going to go ahead and say this, the institution's systems are designed to protect the institution, not the kid. So go ahead and expect that. They do not care about the protection of your kid. They care about the procurement of their own survival. I can tell you that personally. I can tell you that legally, they're not concerned with your child. They're concerned with their own survival.
I would say this because this is just bringing back some memories, right? Like locker rooms growing up. And man, there was some crazy things that happened in locker rooms.
Crazy.
And we look at that now, and the things that we did then, like I'm going to stumble all over this, and please let's keep talking through it. But there was like there's this sense of, well, we used to do it, and we turned out all right.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't. We had never had a thought that it was wrong what was happening.
Right.
So it was normalized.
Yes.
And then now that there's this education that's going on to a certain level of seeing what's happening in locker rooms, and now you're getting stories of, these things happen, and that happened when we were in locker rooms, and it was just kind of boys being boys, right? And that kind of thing. You have no idea what that did to some of the other kids. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I think we have to be careful about even like historically how, because I'm a prime example of when I think of that, I was like, that wasn't a big deal. I mean, we did so forth and so on, and it didn't affect us, but dude, it did.
It did affect us. That's right.
That was a part of our conversation on mental health too, because it was, one of the reasons it's taken so long for people to come to realize the magnitude of mental health is because of that very answer. It's like, well, we dealt with stuff like that and we're all fine. Yeah. And I'm like, well, a lot of y'all ain't fine.
Define fine.
You might be functioning. Yeah. But it comes back to that. Yeah. That's almost as bad of a response to things as like just sheltering and never letting your child out of your house either. It's like, you can't go to an extreme and be like, we made it. Yeah. Because, it's like the up, like our parents used to tell us the uphill and snow both ways.
Yeah, that's right.
School kind of.
We suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah. And I would almost use that exact phrase because it is like the suck it up mentality and messaging has almost caused as much damage as the just ignoring.
But there is a piece of that it's kind of like, man, they have to learn how to operate in this world as well.
It's balanced though.
Yeah, it is. It's balanced. Like, and
I think it comes back to, and this is a question. I won't open too big of a can of worms, but God gives us some standards here about how to treat each other, and putting our kids in places where His standard isn't honored is questionable. Yeah, like treat others the way they need to be treated, the golden rule. And so there is a component of. I had somebody say to me the other day, "Well, we can't really control everything our kids see and do," and I'm like, you can to a point. Mm-hmm. I should to a point. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'm called to a point. The question is, what is that point, right? Yep. When are they capable of processing that enough? Like God's standards have been downloaded to the point that they know and understand. Yeah. And then are physically, emotionally, mentally capable of executing God's standard. And the question is, what is that point? Because here's another problem we have. If we're raising our kids to be that way, will the culture honor it? Because right now we're living in a time and space where young men, my wife actually posted this the other day because we're getting ready at some point. There's stuff we need to release because it's good for public consumption and knowledge. But we want our boys to be defenders. We want young men to learn how to defend their wives, their homes, God's kingdom. They're not to be passive. They're to be active. But what happens in a place where they have been taught the right thing to respond appropriately, but the culture sees that as illegal? Yeah. What are they supposed to do? Do we want them to not do God's thing? And so the question is,
to do the chokehold and the.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So how do we teach them? That's right. They need to know how to do those things. How do we teach them to do them? And when do we release them to execute those things? That to me is an unknown. I don't know where to get, because I agree with you 100%. They're going to have to function in the public square. Yeah. Because God has standards. Like there is a clear thing God says to do. But what happens, we live in a time and a place where what God says to do is going to be prosecuted. Is that our kids' responsibility or ours? And what's our responsibility to make sure they don't have to do that before time? And those are big questions. Yeah. But hugely important. What you got?
Just one last thought on that, because part of that locker room mentality too was everything was always like what happens in the locker room stays in the locker room. So there was never this sense of exposing anything. It just made me think of this verse, and I may be pulling it out of context. I apologize, but Ephesians 5:11 says, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." And I think so. Some of that is happening more because we're starting because of the social media, because of a lot of the things, and some of that's helpful. But also when you start exposing things, there's a lot more trauma and a lot more parts to pick up as well.
Yeah.
And so we've got to do both the exposing, but also be there to heal and to walk through them, which is, why we're trying to do some of these TBRI trainings, even for our own people, because when you start exposing things in people, especially in parents who are already struggling, it's not good enough just to help expose those things in them and bring them out. We've got to help them develop healthy ways of picking that back up and then taking that and applying it into their parenting.
Yeah.
And like we said at the beginning, it's not easy, but that investment, that part of it is so worth it. Like you said, when they get to, not only when they get to teenage years, but even beyond that, even when like your parenting responsibilities, I don't want to say end, but when they become adults, there's still a component of that, of the importance of that attachment and those years that you spent pouring into that, so that when they're 35 and they're dealing with something, or when they're 40 and they've got kids, and then you can come back and say, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about when you were a kid and how we had those conversations, and this is how we did that. And then you could connect that. And that can be generational shifting as well.
Can be.
If it wasn't there before.
I can testify that, we're in the foster adoption world, and we can tell a tangible difference between two that were attached versus one that wasn't and didn't have that privilege for the first 2 years of their life. And the night and day difference is off the charts. And the capacity to deal with that trauma is off the charts. Let me throw this last one I have, and if y'all have anything, because we're really getting like we're
this is good though.
It is good. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Phones. There's enough research out there to say giving phones to kids before 9th grade is dumb. And we failed in that. We started in middle school, and if we could go back and do that over, we would probably not give them any kind of phone. iPod, we started with the iPod. That led to the phone. We would probably not do that until ninth grade and maybe later. And man, just we didn't know. We were doing the best we knew we shouldn't get it too early, but with the social pressure of everybody who had it by that point, you start feeling that, am I going to expose them to unnecessary social stuff? So we gave in 7th grade, and we should have waited till past 9th grade, because the digital, the effect on the brain, number 1, 2, the content that's coming in, and then 3, the fallout from that it wasn't worth it. Yeah. So I would say, parents, if you haven't given them a phone yet, hold off as long as you possibly can.
Yeah.
We saw in the schools of a private Christian school, one of ours early middle school saw their first pornography on somebody else's phone. They showed them in the hallway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what?
No, I know.
I had no
all kinds of stories of middle school boys.
Control over that. And it's like, why is that?
Even elementary now.
Yeah.
Well, schools are, education, being a former educator, schools are usually 20 years behind the curve. And so as soon as digital stuff came out, we've got to get smart boards, we got to get iPads, and we're forgetting all the neurobiology. And now we're down that rabbit hole of we've wrecked kids' brains, we've wrecked their souls.
Dude, but yes, agreed. But the phone is still mine.
Right.
So take it and look at it, and you can control that.
You can control that.
And I think that, because there are some good things about it, and I do agree. I think now, looking back, we probably should have waited another year or two. But and I think too, the kid matters. Like like how well they are aligned to following rules and that kind of thing. And very averse to knowing what they're looking at, and almost, I mean, Elena's always had a guilty conscience. Like she literally, it
makes
wears
a difference.
on her. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. So again, it goes back to knowing your kid, but at the same time, I hear parents like say, "Well, I can't. It's getting into their privacy if I'm looking through their phone or if I'm looking through their room." look,
Ain't no
I
privacy.
pay all the bills.
That's right.
So until she pays the bills, that phone's mine. That room is mine. The bed she's sleeping on is mine.
Absolutely.
And man, I'm going to go through everything. And it's not because I'm trying to evade her privacy. It's because I want to make sure what she's getting into.
Absolutely.
And man, there's this balance of a controlled sow and reap. They have to understand that what they sow, they're going to reap, and we can control some of those things where they can realize and not have such a hard fall, but they start learning that what they do, like their actions have a repercussion and their actions have consequences, and we have to allow them to fail at certain things. That's but good. You can control those things, and man, it really all of a sudden is like, oh yeah, you're going to make that decision, and I'm going to allow you to make that decision. And I'm going to allow you to reap what you've sown. Yeah. And then we can come back and talk about that and say, hey, was that a good decision? And it was like, no, that was a very poor decision. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, well then, good. I'm glad you saw that, but I'm still taking your phone. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm glad you saw that. Here's your phone back. No. Yeah. Because I'm taking your phone. It's still a week. There's still consequences to what you sowed.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. That's huge. And there are resources too. If you're getting in that world, Bark. Until they are 18, Bark is an app that works, but Bark also has a phone now that's hardwired with Bark. I would say Covenant Eyes is a necessity. If you got laptops, iPads, phones, like I still have Covenant Eyes. Like that's not my problem, but because of family of boys, we wanted to make sure we had that. And so my wife sees everything I see. She gets an email report on me every week, phone, iPad, laptop. And so there's a component of like the whole privacy thing. Privacy's very important to a degree for a teenager, but a lack of privacy is also more important. Yeah. They need to know like I'm accountable for what I see. And like that's my thing is I pay that bill. By God, I will see and know. It just is what it is. And you're welcome to go do your own thing. Yeah. You ain't got to be here. That's right. You ain't got to use this. You go get after it.
Well, what if I pay my own phone bill? Okay, well, when you paying rent?
Yeah. With that phone bill comes rent, electricity, internet. Like you don't get the privilege of having one without the other. It's a package deal.
That's right.
So anyway, so that's getting a little.
And there ain't nothing that says or any kind of rule that says you have to give it one period.
No, that's right. Yeah, not at all. It's a societal pressure that I think is a false pressure.
Yeah, one of the things, even staying on the subject of media, like TVs in the rooms. No.
No, not at all. Yeah, we don't do TVs in the rooms.
Nope.
Yeah, nope.
Not happening.
Yep, we refuse to let that happen.
You'll watch TV, we'll watch it together in the living room.
Yeah. Everybody sees what everybody sees. That's the familiar thing. Chris, you got anything to wrap us up? You got some Hayes takeaways?
Always.
Do it, man.
Always ready.
Let's hear it. We need a musical interlude.
Well, yeah, you do, man. Yeah,
I
sing one.
Keep thinking about it. I wrote one at one point. Maybe I have to do one, but no.
It could be Wayne's World, but Hayes takeaways. Hayes takeaways. Take it to Hayes takeaways.
Nice. Now, Wayne's World, you moved into like the 90s now, so that's good. That's
you're moving in. Yeah, that's good, man.
I like it.
Yeah,
proud of you.
Moving on up.
All right, Hayes takeaways for today. Number one, it's not too late. Yes, those first years are crucial and important, but if you still have children at home and haven't been there for them or don't show emotion and affection, well, start now. Build it or rebuild those bonds and that trust, as it will only help them and you in the long run. Number two, if you're married, one of the best ways you can teach your children about safe and loving relationships is by example through your marriage. Tell each other, I love you often, show affection, do things together, communicate well. Don't fight in front of them, but if that happens, be sure to get it right in front of them as well. And if you're not married, that's okay too. Show them with how you treat others, how you date, and most importantly, show them one-on-one as a parent. And then number three, lastly, follow Jesus and get your children involved in church. You may be like, what does that have to do with trauma? And trauma can happen at church. And yes, certainly does and has happened too many times. But it's still imperative to teach them the value and purpose of being present on Sunday mornings and other times, connecting with other believers and families through community and worship together.
Yeah. That's huge, man. Yeah. Well, John, you got any takeaways? Anything you want to say before we're done?
No, man. I appreciate the time. It's good.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. It's a pleasure. Well, guys, thank you for listening to, watching Theology in the Dirt. This is fun to do. As we say often, I want to remind you, we do this primarily so that members of Three Rivers Church have an opportunity to engage with some dialogue that we don't provide from the pulpit on Sunday mornings. We believe that time is for Sunday morning is where we offer to the Lord our worship. We offer to him the preaching of his word. It's an offering to him. It's not an opportunity to just inform. It's not a human-centric thing. It's all about the Lord. But God's given us an avenue for spoken media where we can bring some content to you in a world flooded with content so that we can bring a particular theology and framework and DNA to these topics. And so that's what it's there for. To the degree which you share it outside of that, whatever. And so for those, we have folks who listen around the world. And so we want you to know also that we value you. And so thanks for listening, because to take an hour plus out of your day to listen to us wax eloquent or not eloquent on a topic is an honor for us. And it's a responsibility that we don't take lightly, because the scriptures teach that those who teach know that they're going to be judged in a little more strict fashion. And so we take that seriously, and we try to be as best informed as we possibly can. And so thank you for listening. And so we'd love for you to share it. Give us 5-star rating, leave a comment, all that stuff, share it. And the degree to which the Lord chooses to use it to build his church, we're grateful for that. So thanks for listening. Join us next time, and we'll get after another topic. You can email us, theologydirt@gmail.com. Ask us questions, we'll answer. See ya. Bye.